Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. I was standing barefoot in a narrow alley behind a row of tired brick buildings, the cold from the cracked concrete seeping straight into my bones, when my mother-in-law pointed at a pile of trash bags in the corner and laughed. "That is where you belong," she said, her voice light with cruelty. "Maybe a beggar will pick you up." Her words were sharp, precise, practiced, as if she had rehearsed them long before that night. My chest burned, but my face stayed still. My name is Aisha Coleman Ellis. Less than 10 minutes earlier, I had signed divorce papers that left me with nothing. No home, no savings, no dignity, just shaking hands in a silence so loud it felt violent. Behind her, the apartment door slammed shut. The lock clicked, clean and final. They believed that alley would be the end of me. I sank down beside the damp wall, wrapping my arms around myself, trying to understand how a 5-year marriage could end with someone pointing at a pile of garbage and calling it my future. I had loved their son. I had cooked in that kitchen, scrubbed those floors, defended that family when no one else would. I had justified every slight, every cold look, every quiet insult, because I believed love meant staying. And now, in their eyes, I was not a wife, not even a person. I was something they had thrown away. A few windows above the alley flickered on, then off again. People heard the shouting. People saw me standing there with bare feet and red eyes. No one came down. No one opened a window to ask if I was all right. The air smelled like wet cardboard, fried food, and old rain. It struck me then that humiliation has a smell, heavy and sour, clinging to you long after the words fade. A few feet away, my phone lay on the ground, its screen cracked but glowing faintly in the dark. I stared at it like it was a test I had been trying to pass for years. 5 years earlier, before I left my family, I had been given one instruction. It was not angry. It was not dramatic. It was calm and final. My grandfather had looked me in the eye and said, "If you ever reach a point where you truly have nowhere else to go, make the call." But only then. I had promised myself I would never need that number. I told myself I would prove that I could build a life without the Coleman name, that I could survive on my own choices. Through bad days, lonely nights, and quiet humiliation, I repeated the same sentence in my head. Do not call them. Prove you can survive on your own. But that night, pride would not keep me warm. Pride would not give me a place to sleep. Pride would not keep me alive. My fingers were numb as I crawled toward the phone. The cracked glass glowed against the concrete. My reflection stared back at me in warped fragments, eyes swollen, hair frizzy from the drizzle, lipstick smeared at the edges. I hesitated, the way you hesitate before jumping into deep water. Then I dialed the one number I had sworn never to use. The call rang once, twice. Every ring made my chest tighten. Then a familiar, steady voice answered. "Miss Coleman Ellis, where are you?" I let out a sound that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh. "Behind the apartment on West Grant Street," I whispered. "In the alley by the dumpsters." There was no pause, no lecture, no question. "Stay where you are," he said. "I am on my way." 30 minutes later, headlights flooded the alley, and everything they believed they had destroyed began to rise. 1 hour earlier, I had still been inside the apartment I once believed was my home, on the north side of Philadelphia. The living room lights were too bright, the overhead bulbs exposing every crack in the paint, every stain on the carpet. The air felt tight, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something ugly to happen. There was no television playing in the background, no music from Tanisha's room, just the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Brandon stood across from me near the coffee table, his shoulders squared, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold in a way I had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not pain. It was calculation, the look of someone who had already decided something and was now performing it. He held a manila folder in one hand and a pen in the other, like this was a routine business transaction instead of the end of a marriage. "We are done, Aisha," he said, his voice flat. "Sign the papers." He dropped the folder on the table between us. The pages slid out with a soft hiss. My name was printed neatly beside his on the top line. Divorce waiver. No assets. No claims. No questions. My stomach lurched. "What are you talking about?" I asked, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle in the quiet room. "This came out of nowhere. We need to talk." "Brandon, sit down. Tell me what is really going on." He did not sit. Instead, I noticed movement in the hallway. His mother, Gloria, was standing there with her arms crossed, watching the scene like it was a show she had been eager to see. Her face was calm, unreadable, but there was a small satisfied tilt to her mouth that made my skin crawl. A few steps behind her, his sister Tanisha leaned against the wall, scrolling on her phone with lazy interest, as if she were half watching a movie and half checking social media. This is not a fight, I realized as my eyes moved from one face to the other. This is a meeting. Gloria walked into the living room and sat down on the edge of the armchair like she was about to conduct a formal interview. You have nothing to talk about, she said calmly. You have outlived your usefulness. The sentence was delivered with the same tone she used when she returned groceries she did not like. I stared at her, the words landing one by one. Usefulness. I repeated softly. I am your daughter-in-law. She raised an eyebrow. You were, she said. Now you are a problem. Brandon has a future to protect. You are in the way. I turned to my husband. Brandon, tell her that is not true, I said. Look at me. Tell me you do not see me as some tool you can discard. He looked at me, and for the first time since I had met him, his eyes did not soften. You knew this was coming, Brandon said, stepping closer. You just did not want to accept it. Things have been bad for a long time. You knew you were not giving this family what it needed. His voice was not raised, but every word cut. Not giving this family what it needed? I repeated. I have been here every day. I have worked in this house, cooked your meals, picked up after everyone, taken care of everything while you chased deals that did not exist. I have stood up for you when people whispered. How exactly was I not enough? He shrugged like the answer was obvious. We needed more, he said. A child. Stability. Support. The way he said support made my skin prickle, although I did not yet understand why. I opened my mouth to argue, but Gloria cut in again. If you do not sign, we will make this very uncomfortable for you, she said. You do not want problems. You do not want people talking. You do not want your little past dragged out in front of everyone, do you? Tanisha finally looked up from her phone, her glossed lips curling into a smirk. Trust me, she said softly. You do not want people talking. She tipped her head like she was enjoying a secret joke. That was the moment something inside me shifted. They were not emotional. They were not reactive. They were organized. This was not a breakdown. It was an eviction. So this was the plan? I asked quietly. Get me to sign everything away in this living room with no lawyer, no witness, just the three of you hovering like a jury? Brandon shook his head. You are being dramatic, he said. This is simple. We are not good together. You sign, we move on, and no one needs to hear about your family or your money or anything else. The way he squeezed that last word, money, made my pulse jump. What about the last 5 years? I asked. My voice rose despite myself. What about every night I stayed up with you, listening to you talk about your business, your dreams, your stress? What about all the times your mother criticized me, and you stood there saying nothing? What about every time your sister used me like a maid, and you pretended not to see? My throat tightened. Do those years mean nothing to you? For a moment, something passed over his face, too quick to name. Then it was gone. They were what they were, he said. Now it is over. Sign the papers. Gloria leaned forward with a small sigh of impatience, as if I were delaying a scheduled appointment. Aisha, she said, you walked into this family with nothing. You are leaving with nothing. That is fair. Do not invent a tragedy where there is none. The pen lay on the folder, its silver body gleaming under the bright living room light. My hand shook as I picked it up. I thought about asking for a lawyer. I thought about refusing. But I saw the way Gloria watched me, the way Tanisha's fingers hovered above her phone like she was ready to record a single outburst and twist it into something else. I saw the way Brandon had already closed himself off. He had stepped out of this marriage long before he placed those papers on the table. In that room, surrounded by people who had already erased me, I understood something very clearly. I was never a wife to them. I was a placeholder, a convenient solution, a body in a role they planned to vacate as soon as it stopped serving them. With a hollow feeling in my chest, I signed my name where they told me to sign. My hand scraped across the paper. The pen left a small ink blot at the end of my last name, as if even the signature resisted. When it was over, Brandon gathered the papers with brisk efficiency. Gloria stood and smoothed her skirt, already finished with me. Tanisha turned away, tapping her screen. You can pack your things, Gloria said. But be quick. We have given you more than enough time already. I looked around at the small living room, the secondhand furniture, the framed family photos that never included me at the center. The place that I had tried so hard to call home suddenly looked like a stage set, flimsy and false. "I need a minute," I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "Take all the minutes you want in the alley," Gloria replied. She walked to the door, opened it, and gestured outside. "You are not staying here tonight." I stared at her. "You are putting me out with no notice, no plan, nowhere to go?" She smiled, a thin stretch of lips. "You will figure it out," she said. "Women like you always do. Or you call those people you are so ashamed of. Either way, this chapter is finished." Brandon did not meet my eyes as he opened the apartment door wider. Cold air rushed in from the stairwell. "It is better this way," he said. "Please do not make this harder than it has to be." Something in me broke at that word. Harder. He spoke as if he were the victim, as if signing away my life had been a burden for him. I stepped past him, my bare feet slapping against the hallway floor. I had not even put on shoes. I had not believed, even then, that they would lock me out. The stairwell was dim and smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarette smoke. My fingertips brushed the rough railing as I walked down. Behind me, I heard the door close. Then the lock turned with a clean, final click. By the time I reached the back exit that led to the alley, the apartment above me was already silent. I pushed the heavy metal door open and stepped into the narrow passage between buildings, the night air wrapping itself around me like cold water. That was where Gloria's voice floated down from the window. That was where she pointed toward the trash bags and laughed. "That is where you belong. Maybe a beggar will pick you up." Her face disappeared from the window a moment later, satisfied. The light snapped off. I stood there for several seconds, my mind buzzing with noise, my body refusing to move, until the cold finally forced me to the ground. I pulled my knees to my chest and tried to slow my breathing. My hands were shaking so badly that I could not feel my fingers anymore. Time blurred. At some point, the phone fell from my pocket and landed on the ground beside me. When I finally noticed the faint glow, I stared at it for a long time. 5 years of stubbornness sat between me and that call. 5 years of insisting that independence meant never asking for help, never admitting that I had chosen wrong. In that alley, on that night, none of those rules mattered. Survival mattered more. I picked up the phone. My fingers were stiff, and the screen blurred with tears, but the number was etched into my memory. I dialed. When the voice answered and called me Miss Coleman Ellis. Using both my married and my birth name, something inside me cracked wide open. I told him the address. I told him I was outside. I told him I had nowhere to go. "You are not alone," Mr. Lawson said without hesitation. "Stay where you are. I am coming." When the call ended, I lowered the phone into my lap and stared at the dark street. For the first time that night, I was not waiting to be discarded. I was waiting to be found. Minutes stretched strangely in the cold. The alley felt unreal, like a place I no longer belonged to but could not yet leave. I remember thinking that if no one came, I might simply disappear there quietly without anyone ever knowing where I had gone. Then the darkness changed. At first, it was just a thin line of light at the far end of the alley, the soft glow of headlights turning in from the main road. I lifted my head, unsure if I was imagining it. The sound came next, low and controlled, the kind of engine sound you hear when someone has invested in both power and silence. One car appeared, then another, then a third. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if they knew exactly where they were going. Windows in the surrounding buildings lit up again. This time, no one turned them off. People peered through blinds and curtains, watching. The cars stopped a few feet away from me. Doors opened with quiet clicks. Men stepped out, dressed in dark coats over pressed suits, calm and alert. They formed an instinctive barrier between me and the rest of the alley without saying a word. Then I saw him. Mr. Lawson walked toward me without hesitation. He was older than when I had last seen him, a little more gray at the temples, but his eyes were exactly the same, clear, steady, and impossible to rattle. He took off his coat and wrapped it around my shoulders before I could even stand. The fabric was heavy and warm, smelling faintly of cologne and outside air. "You are safe now, Aisha," he said softly. That was the moment relief finally broke through the numbness. My body trembled as he helped me to my feet. The men around us shifted slightly, shielding me from the windows and the street as we walked toward the first car. No one stared. No one whispered. The silence felt respectful instead of accusing, protective instead of punishing. I slid into the back seat, the leather cold for just a second before the heat wrapped around me. As the door closed, I looked back at the alley through the tinted glass. The same cracked concrete, the same trash pile. But the story had already changed. They believed they had left me with nothing. They had no idea who would come looking for me. The car moved smoothly through the streets of Philadelphia, the city lights blurring past the window like they belonged to another life. Inside the car, it was warm and quiet. Mr. Lawson sat in the front passenger seat, speaking in low tones to the driver into a small earpiece, coordinating something I could not see. I sat wrapped in his coat, my hands slowly thawing, my body still shaking from shock more than cold. No one asked me for details. No one demanded that I explain myself. They simply treated me as someone who deserved protection. That alone felt unfamiliar. We drove north, away from the cramped row houses and corner stores, onto wider roads lined with tall trees and long stone walls. I recognized the path before I saw the house. I had not been there in 5 years. The estate lights were already on when we turned through the iron gates. The driveway curved around a wide fountain, its water shut off for the season, but still elegant under the security lights. The main house stood at the end of the drive, tall windows glowing with warm light. The front door stood open, as if it had been waiting for me this entire time. My grandfather, Reginald Coleman, stood just inside the doorway with one hand resting lightly on his cane. He was thinner than I remembered, his shoulders narrower, but his presence filled the space as completely as ever. His eyes found me the second I stepped out of the car. For a moment, his expression remained composed. Then something in his face broke, not in weakness, but in grief and anger tightly contained. I walked toward him slowly, my legs unsteady. I expected questions. I expected a lecture. I expected an "I told you so" buried in polite words. Instead, he took one step forward, his voice rougher than I had ever heard it. "What did they do to you?" That was all it took. Everything I had been holding inside collapsed at once. I crossed the room, dropped to my knees in front of him without thinking, and cried harder than I had in my entire adult life. I was wrong, I choked out between sobs. I thought I could fix it. I thought love was enough. I thought if I just tried harder, they would see me, they would treat me differently, I could not finish the sentence. My words dissolved into tears. My grandfather placed a trembling hand on my shoulder and shook his head. "You do not kneel in this house, Aisha," he said. "Not ever." He helped me stand, then held my face gently in his hands, studying me the way only someone who truly knows you can. "You are home," he said. "That is what matters." The word home landed in my chest like a stone and then slowly began to soften. His voice shifted, becoming calm, precise, and controlled, the way it did in boardrooms and negotiations. He looked past me toward Mr. Lawson. "Lawson," he said. "Yes, sir," Mr. Lawson replied. "I want everything on that family," my grandfather said. "Financial records, property, employment history, accounts, every detail. Leave nothing untouched." There was no rage in his tone, only clarity. Mr. Lawson nodded once. "Understood," he said. He left the room with two of the men who had come to the alley, their footsteps quiet against the polished floor. My grandfather turned back to me. "Rest now," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we will find out the truth." For the first time since the alley, I felt something stronger than pain. I felt protected. The next morning, I sat across from my grandfather in his study. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, falling across shelves lined with books and framed photographs from a life I had walked away from. A thick folder sat on the desk between us. He did not open it right away. He waited until I had eaten, showered, and changed into clothes that were not stained with tears and alley dust. "Some truths are heavy," he said. "It is better to meet them standing." I nodded, though I was not sure if I was ready for any of it. He slid the folder toward me. "Lawson and the team worked through the night," he said. "What you are about to read explains more than you might want to know." My fingers hovered over the cover for a moment, then I opened it. The first page held a name I recognized too well. Brandon Ellis. Employment history. Business registrations. Financial disclosures. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Sales jobs, a small logistics company, a few vague consulting roles. Then I reached the bank statements. My name was there. Not once. Not twice. Month after month, over several years. Money had been transferred regularly from an account under my name into accounts controlled by Brandon and his mother. The numbers blurred for a second as my heart pounded in my ears. "I never sent this," I said quietly. My grandfather's eyes did not leave my face. "You did not," he answered. That account is a trust your parents created for you before they died. Modest by our standards, but enough to live comfortably. It was meant to teach you independence, not to fund anyone's schemes. My mind raced backward. I saw Brandon insisting that he would handle the finances, so I would not stress about money. I heard him explaining that his business was covering most of our expenses, that things were tight but manageable, that he just needed a little time for everything to take off. I remembered the way he brushed my hand away from bills with a casual smile and said, "I have it." I turned the page. The company he claimed was successful had been losing money for years. Losses were disguised as investments. Loans were stacked on top of loans. The apartment we lived in was not paid for by his success. It was paid for by me, by my parents, by signatures I never saw, authorizations I never gave. So he was not supporting the family, I whispered. He was using me to support them. My grandfather nodded slowly. When your usefulness ended, he said, so did the arrangement. I closed the folder carefully, my fingers pressing against the cardboard as if it could steady me. In that moment, something very important shifted inside me. For years, I had thought I was weak for staying. I had thought I was naive for believing his promises, for accepting his explanations, for enduring his family's contempt. But the truth was simpler and colder. I was not foolish. I was targeted. Brandon did not destroy our marriage because I failed as a wife. He destroyed it because he had already taken everything he could. Once the account had been drained to his satisfaction, my place in that apartment became a liability instead of an asset. The shame I had been carrying, the quiet belief that I had somehow caused all of this by not being enough, no longer belonged to me. It belonged to them. By midday, the house no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a command center. Phones rang quietly in other rooms. Staff moved with purpose, not panic. Doors opened and closed with soft clicks. No one raised their voice. Nothing felt rushed. Yet I could feel decisions being made around me, threads being pulled, lines being traced back to the people who had pointed at trash and told me I belonged there. My grandfather stood by the window, looking out over the manicured lawn, his posture calm and unmoved. You can stay hidden, he said without turning around. No one would blame you after what you have been through. I understood what he was offering. Time, privacy, the chance to heal without the outside world knowing that I had come home. I looked at the folder on the desk, at my name on those statements, at the evidence of every lie. Something inside me had changed in that alley, and it did not change back just because I was now standing in a warm study with a roof over my head. If I stayed quiet, I would be allowing their version of me to stand. I would be confirming their story that I had walked away broken and powerless. No, I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. I am done being erased. He turned from the window, studying me with the same careful gaze he used in high-stakes negotiations. Then he nodded once. So be it, he said. Within hours, a brief statement left the Coleman offices. No drama, no accusations, just facts. Aisha Coleman Ellis had returned to the Coleman family. She would be assuming a leadership role within the organization in the coming months. Nothing more. Nothing less. That was all it took. Messages flooded in. Business partners called. Old friends who had fallen silent when I married Brandon sent cautious texts. Reporters reached out, careful but curious. And somewhere across the city, I knew a very different apartment had gone quiet. Brandon and his family believed they had thrown away a powerless woman. They had no idea they had severed ties with the person whose name quietly sat behind the money that had kept them afloat. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. For the first time in 5 years, I was standing in my own name again. Whatever came next would happen in the open, not as someone's wife, not as someone's burden, but as myself. The first move was quiet. No shouting, no confrontation, no late-night calls filled with accusations. Just paperwork. My grandfather believed in something very simple. If someone built a life on lies, you did not need revenge. You simply removed the lies and let gravity do the rest. The legal team reviewed every contract tied to Brandon's company slowly and carefully, line by line. It did not take long. Deadlines had been missed. Clauses had been violated. Numbers did not add up. A house of cards was posing as a business. 2 major contracts were terminated within 24 hours. Perfectly legal. Perfectly clean. At the same time, outstanding loans were purchased quietly through a third party. There were no announcements, no warnings, just a change in ownership and tone. Brandon did not realize what had happened at first. All he knew was that the calls from banks shifted from polite to firm, from firm to urgent. He tried to negotiate. He tried to stall. He tried to charm his way out of obligations the way he always had. It did not work because this time he was not dealing with people he could manipulate over dinner or with a smile. He was dealing with consequences. I watched the reports arrive in my grandfather's study without emotion. This was not about hurting him. This was about stopping the bleeding, reclaiming what had been taken, and making sure no one could use my name that way again. The strangest part was how calm I felt. No rage. No thrill. Just a quiet understanding that when you stop protecting someone who has been using you, their world collapses under its own weight. Brandon's world began to tilt in silence. His phone stopped ringing with friendly voices. Meetings he had counted on were canceled without explanation. Promises he had relied on for years dissolved. At home, the atmosphere changed just as quickly. Gloria no longer spoke with cool confidence. Her questions turned sharp, then desperate. She paced the apartment, replaying every decision, every imagined insult. "How could you let this happen?" she snapped at Brandon. "After everything we did for you?" Tanisha's situation crumbled in a different way. The future she bragged about online began to unravel. Invitations stopped. Messages went unanswered. The people she laughed with moved on without her. The apartment that had once felt crowded with noisy certainty now echoed with blame. Brandon made calls late into the night, pacing the living room where I had signed my name away, whispering promises he could no longer keep. He told Gloria and Tanisha that it was temporary, that he had a plan, that he could fix it if everyone would just calm down. But plans require leverage, and Brandon had none left. That was when he called me. I watched his name light up my phone screen while I sat at a small table on the back terrace of the Coleman estate, a mug of tea cooling in my hands. His contact photo stared back at me, a smile that I now understood had been practiced, not spontaneous. I felt nothing. No fear. No longing. Just distance. I let the phone ring. When I finally answered, I said nothing at first. The silence stretched. Whatever control he believed he still had slipped away in that pause. "Aisha, please," he said, his voice unrecognizable, thin with panic. "We need to talk. This has gone too far. They're coming after me. My mother is falling apart. Tanisha cannot handle this. You cannot let them do this to us." "Brandon," I said quietly, "they are not doing anything to you that you did not set in motion yourself." He stumbled over his words. "You know, I never meant for you to get hurt. I just needed time. I was going to pay it back. I was doing it for us." I closed my eyes for a moment. "There was never an us in those accounts," I said. "There was you and there was my name. You made that choice. Now you can live with it." I ended the call. I did not go looking for more damage. The truth came to me on its own. As the investigation continued, Mr. Lawson brought me another file, thinner than the first but heavier in a different way. He was not only dishonest with money, Lawson said carefully. He was consistent. Inside were names, messages, photos, and patterns. There were other women. Not dramatic love affairs filled with passion and conflict, but connections built with intention. Each woman offered something specific: access, status, opportunity, a link to another circle that he wanted to enter. When one woman stopped being useful, another appeared in her place. The language in his messages was almost identical, copied and pasted from one conversation to another. I felt something shift again, but this time it was not shock. It was clarity. I agreed to meet some of them. Not as an accuser. Not as a rival. As someone who had finally seen the whole picture and wanted them to see it too. We met in a quiet conference room on the first floor of the Coleman offices, a neutral space with a long table and tall windows. Each conversation followed the same rhythm. At first, they defended him. They said he was misunderstood, ambitious, under pressure. They said he loved them in his own way. Then the evidence came out. Screenshots, bank transfers, calendar overlaps, the same half-truths, the same promises, the same excuses. One woman stared at the documents and whispered, "He said that to me too." Word for word. Another let out a bitter laugh. "I thought I was different," she said. "I thought he chose me because he saw something special in me." I met her eyes. "You were not foolish," I said. "You were targeted, just like I was." We did not form an alliance out of anger. We formed it out of recognition. Manipulation thrives in isolation. It survives when victims believe they are alone, when each person thinks their experience is an exception instead of part of a pattern. Once the pattern was visible, it lost its power. I did not ask them to fight for me. I asked them to stop protecting someone who had never truly protected them. When they stopped defending him in their silence and in their circles, Brandon's carefully constructed image began to fracture everywhere at once. Not with noise, but with truth. I agreed to one interview. Just one. Not to tell my story in rage, not to humiliate anyone in public, but to place the facts in a place where they could no longer be twisted or buried in whispers. The studio was simple. A chair, a camera, a table with a glass of water. No dramatic lighting. No music. The interviewer asked questions in a calm, neutral tone. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and answered just as calmly. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I spoke slowly and carefully, the way people do when they are no longer trying to convince anyone of anything. I described how easy it is to confuse endurance with love, how often people are told to be patient, understanding, and forgiving, even when the cost is their own dignity. I explained the financial manipulation, the quiet erosion of self, the way control hides behind charm and gratitude. I mentioned Brandon's name once because facts require clarity, but I did not repeat it. The story did not need his name to have weight. At the end of the interview, I announced something that mattered more to me than reputation or perception. I was establishing a foundation that would provide legal guidance and emotional support for people trapped in toxic marriages and financial abuse. Not as charity, but as accountability. A place where no one would be told they were overreacting when their boundaries were crossed in the name of love. The response was immediate. Messages began arriving within hours. Stories poured in from strangers who described the same patterns with different names. Quiet thank yous from people who said they finally recognized what they had been living through. As those voices rose, Brandon's remaining support thinned. Business partners distanced themselves. Friends fell silent. Invitations disappeared. Not because I had attacked him, but because the truth made association uncomfortable. When the interview ended and the cameras turned off, the room felt strangely light. I had not destroyed anyone. I had simply stopped carrying a lie that was never mine to hold. I thought that might be the end of it. I thought the rest would unfold in courtrooms and conference rooms, far from my daily life. I was wrong about that part. The final mistake did not come from Brandon. It came from his mother. Desperation changes people. It strips away logic and replaces it with impulse. Gloria had lost everything she believed defined her worth. The money she depended on, the status she enjoyed, the control she exercised over her son and his household. When people like her lose control, they rarely retreat quietly. One evening, just after sunset, Mr. Lawson called me. I was in the library, halfway through a novel I had tried to read 3 times before and never managed to finish. His voice was calm, but his words were not. "She has left the apartment," he said. "She is acting erratically. We are tracking her movements." A chill ran down my spine, the same cold that had settled into my bones in that alley. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. The text was short. "If you want him safe, come alone." No name. No explanation. Just fear sharpened into a threat. I stared at the words, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I did not panic. Panic was what she expected. Instead, I handed the phone to Mr. Lawson and listened. Authorities were already moving quietly, coordinating with our security. The goal was not confrontation. It was containment. I followed instructions exactly. I drove where I was told to drive, said nothing unnecessary, and kept my eyes open. The meeting point was an empty parking lot behind a closed grocery store on the edge of the city. The lot lights flickered overhead, casting a pale halo over cracked asphalt. Gloria stood near a parked car, her posture rigid. She did not look powerful. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes wild with sleeplessness and fury. "You took everything from me," she hissed as I approached. "You ruined my family. You made us look like criminals." I stopped a few feet away, staying exactly where Mr. Lawson had instructed me to stand. I could feel the presence of others in the shadows, out of sight but close enough to move if they needed to. "You did that yourself," I said. My voice did not shake. "You chose lies. You chose to use people. You chose to treat me like trash in a hallway." I simply stopped standing in front of the consequences. For a second, confusion flickered in her eyes. Then the realization settled in. Intimidation no longer worked. Fear no longer lived where it used to. Before she could react, voices called out from the edges of the lot. Lights swept across the asphalt. The scene ended without spectacle. No dramatic struggle. No shouted speeches. Just the quiet sound of consequences finally catching up to actions that had gone unchecked for years. Later that night, as I sat wrapped in a blanket in my grandfather's study, Mr. Lawson stood nearby with his hands folded behind his back. "This is over, Aisha," he said gently. For the first time, I believed him. Not because they had vanished from the city, but because I was no longer running from what they had done. The days that followed were quiet in a way I had never experienced before. No alarms jangling in my head. No accusations waiting at the end of the day. No need to apologize for existing in someone else's space. Legal matters unfolded without drama. Paperwork replaced panic. Timelines replaced chaos. I did not attend every meeting. I did not need to. For the first time, I trusted a process that did not require me to shrink myself to keep the peace. What surprised me most was not relief, but space. Space to think clearly. Space to sleep without tension coiled in my chest. Space to notice how tired I had been for years without realizing it. I took walks along the tree-lined driveway in the mornings. I read books I had abandoned halfway through. I relearned what silence sounded like when it was not punishment. People occasionally asked if I felt victorious. I did not. I felt finished. There is a difference. Victory looks outward. It needs witnesses and applause. Closure happens quietly. It does not announce itself. It simply arrives when there is nothing left to prove. I was not rebuilding my life from ruins. I was returning to it from exile. And in that calm, I finally understood something simple and essential. Leaving was not my failure. Staying silent for so long had been. Now I had my voice back, and I intended to use it carefully, not as a weapon, but as a boundary. People still ask if this was a story about revenge. It is not. It is a story about permission. The permission to stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. The permission to walk away without offering one last chance to those who have already shown you who they are. The permission to choose dignity over endurance. For a long time, I believed strength meant staying, being patient, absorbing discomfort so others could remain comfortable. I believed it meant fixing everything, even when I was the one being broken. I was wrong. Real strength is clarity. It is recognizing when love has turned into control, when compromise has turned into erasure, when silence has turned into harm. Brandon and his family did not fall because I attacked them. They fell because I stepped aside and let the truth stand on its own. That is the part no one warns you about. When you stop protecting someone who is hurting you, they collapse under the weight of who they really are. You do not have to push. You just have to stop holding them up. I walked into that alley believing my life was over. I walked out of it wrapped in a borrowed coat, carried by headlights toward a door that had never actually closed on me. I thought I had chosen between love and comfort when I married Brandon. In reality, I had chosen between illusion and truth. It took 5 years, one locked door, and one cracked phone for me to understand that the truth had been waiting for me all along. Walking away was not the ending I feared. It was the beginning I had been denying myself. Generate a scene description that explains this story, which I can use as a thumbnail.